And indeed, to our Orthodox brothers and sisters, Easter is today. It has something to do with the difference in calendars and marking of dates and the equinox, and it's complicated. But for us, who had Easter last Sunday, the first Sunday after Easter is traditionally known as Low Sunday. It's kind of an unflattering nickname, actually, for us in the church, because last week we presented the triumph of the church year. We announced to the world the good news of Jesus Christ, that Jesus died and rose again to new life for love of us. And the result is the next Sunday tends to be the lowest attendance of the whole church year, all the way across Christendom. Although, I think you guys are going to beat that a little bit. You're good, but generally, ouch. And we think to ourselves in the church, was it something we said? And, well, it might have been. Truth be told, the Gospels are shocking, frankly, quite hard to believe. It was hard to believe even for the people who knew Jesus in person while he was alive and witnessed his many miracles. Today, and we do this just about every of these Sundays after Easter every year, we tell the story of doubting Thomas, the apostle who had to see to believe. But what I want you to keep in mind is what we just heard about Thomas. The gift of the resurrection doesn't come at the same time for him as it did for the other disciples. Now, Thomas, along with Peter, I think, is one of the most human of the disciples. And they're all human, but human maybe in some of those human qualities that we stumble with. And this story from John is very rich with interesting questions. The first thing we notice is, as I said, Thomas misses out on Jesus' first appearance to the disciples. Remember, there was Good Friday, and Jesus was crucified. Jesus is in the tomb. The stone is rolled away. He is not there, which brings us to Sunday night, a week ago, right? And the disciples have been locked in the upper room, afraid for their lives. But not Thomas. Where is he? Well, we don't know. Maybe he was terrified and trying to hide by himself, not wanting to be found by the Romans, right in the middle of the pack of ringleaders of Jesus' rebellion. Maybe Thomas was instead full of courage, the only one brave enough to venture out and bring back food for his friends. Well, whatever it was, he was not there when Jesus appeared in the locked upper room. He missed that resurrection. Well, I claim this myself, and maybe you do too. There's a frustrated futility when we feel we're missing out, isn't there? Missing out in areas of our lives. Maybe missing out on resurrection, right? God raising things to new life, but our attention is elsewhere. Checked out. Missing in action like Thomas. Thomas does eventually show up with the rest of the disciples, and they tell him, "We have seen the Lord." But now what was he supposed to think? Because he was the only one who had been brave enough to leave. If he had watched his brothers and friends nearly mad with fear and grief the last 3 days, well, he probably feels compassion and love for them. They wanted their friend back, their leader not to have been condemned to death. And so maybe he feels they've dreamed up this vision they've experienced. And who knows? Thomas wouldn't put it past Jesus to come to them as a ghost. Lord knows he did stranger things when he was alive. But he is no longer alive. He's dead. And Thomas knows that denying that won't help anyone. It's never brought back the rest of the family and friends he's lost over the years. I won't bring back Jesus. Now, Thomas remains in this state, unable to trust the words of his friends for an entire week. What must that have been like for Thomas? The rest of the disciples, they're ecstatic, they're floating on air, knowing that Jesus has been raised from the dead. But Thomas doesn't see Jesus that week. Why did he leave the disciples alone? It's kind of like low attendance Sunday. Last Sunday we saw Jesus raised, and now we're back and we're starting to wonder, did we really see what we thought? Now we do this every year. We've been witnesses. But not Thomas. He only has his stubbornness to keep him going. And maybe, I think, a spark of hope. Because why would Thomas stick around for that week with what he believed to be friends driven by delusions, if not for a tiny speck of hope? If Jesus was truly dead, there was nothing left for him with this group. By all rights, he could go home to his fields or his fishing boat, wherever. Remaining with the disciples was a dead end. The longer they stayed together, the greater danger of arrest by the Romans. And spending time only brings back every minute of every day the knowledge that their friend Jesus was gone. But Thomas stayed. He did. Is it possible a small part of him wondered, maybe this story might be true? And he reveals himself a bit. When he answers their claim that they've seen the Lord, he says, well, unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and I put my finger in the mark of the nails, in my hands in his side, I will not believe. He doesn't say, you're crazy, I'm leaving. He sets up this condition under which he will believe in the resurrection. It's almost as if he's laying out the challenge to Jesus. Come and show me, Jesus. Come and prove it to me. Come, on any terms. Thomas wants to be tough and uncaring and skeptical, but he did love Jesus. And he's grieving. And they're joyful since seeing Jesus. And Thomas doesn't have that comfort. And so he throws down the challenge, provoking Jesus to come. And as we know, Jesus does not disappoint. Even though Thomas has had this grim week, the lone skeptic, as soon as Jesus arrives, as soon as he bids them peace again, he calls Thomas and says, put your fingers here, see my hands. Do not doubt, but believe. What I find fascinating and revealing is that even in this resurrected body, Jesus' wounds remain. It's not like movie magic, right? Where we see the healing in a granular way. Those wounds are still there. And how appropriate to Thomas's story and our own. You know, resurrection is possible for us in many areas of our own lives. But our wounds remain. Our scars, painful as they were in the making, they make us indelibly who we are. Jesus is resurrected to new life, but he is himself. And he helps Thomas recognize him through his wounds. It's a potent lesson for us today. When we look at ourselves and at each other, part of the proof of our true resurrection is that the past is brought forward and coexists with the present. Our wounds are not erased, ever, as if they never existed. They're proof that although new and whole, it is in our woundedness that we get to a day of resurrection in the first place. Now, there was one other thing in the early church that happened on a low attendance Sunday, and they had them too. in the early church. Those who were baptized on Easter, they received a new white robe, and then they wore it all week. But the Sunday following Easter, they took it off, and they went back to the regular clothes. There's something very poignant about that and about our story of Thomas. Today, on this Sunday for us, well, we still have our flowers, but the trumpeting isn't happening. We're going back to the way things usually are. We've put away our fancy suit and our bonnet and our dresses, and we are now the people we've always been. The same people, loved and recognized by Jesus, wounded, alive, breathing, whole. And in our everyday life, can we remember and recognize the same type of resurrection in each other? Thomas was a week late to the resurrection, but he made it. He made it all the same. Where do you find yourself today? There is still time for you to come back to life if maybe you missed out last week. Reach out, says our story. Touch the wounded, living Jesus, and feel him touch your wounded, living soul. Amen. Now we sing our hymn of the day. You'll find it in your hymnal or on the screen.